and some small SMEs are being hit. But what are those business continuity mechanisms that should have been put in place, or what are they supposed to be in place now? Well, number one really is about your readiness and readiness of your ICT support network, because what is going to happen is we are going to be relying more and more on the internet for us to be able to access market, for us to be able to meet in this manner, and for us to conduct business. So if we can't meet, if we can't transact physically, we have got to find a way of communicating and transacting. And that really goes back to the issue of readiness of your ICT. Now, we've heard so many times about the future of ICT, future being ICT and so on. Well, now really here is the future. So your readiness to work online. And now what does that also mean? Your business contingency plans are being tested. If you had them before, this is the stress test that you're having. I think the mindset that I must admit I had, and for many that had, is if the business continuity, if something happens to your business, and maybe we thought that that's a flood or that there's a fire in your building, where do you go, where do you relocate, how do you relocate stuff? Clearly what we're saying is that it must be much, much, much more than that. And so I don't know whether anyone was ready to work in these unprecedented times. For example, right now, working at home, working remotely means that you're introducing flex hours really for yourself. You're being unregulated and unsupervised. But have we noticed that we may be working much more than the 8 hours? Who compensates that? So the issue to look at right now is at least that you have some flexi hours, some flexible working conditions for staff. Even if we open up clearly, as we're being told, we are going to be in this situation of social distancing for the next 18 months. That means then that you are going to not going to have all your staff in your office at any one time. You're not going to have a farm meeting or an office meeting as well, even a departmental meeting in the manner that you have. So you're going to have to introduce some flexi working conditions. So people coming in, maybe in shifts. So that means then you have to stagger your introduced shifts to bring your limits. Do you, other things that you have to consider in that regard, first of all, how ready, how equipped are your staff? Is your staff at home to work remotely? So data, computers, if you're used to a desktop and your staff are relying on desktops, we may have to have them carry the desktops to the office and maybe back home and then to the office. I don't know. But clearly there's got to be some readiness and some flexible working hours, working conditions to allow for delivery and output. If you have been so stringent about your laptops never go out, well, this is the time, unfortunately, for you to empower your team to work remotely. Or if you have been, your IT security is such that you don't allow emails on handsets, you don't allow for access of information on only you only allow it on only office equipment. The flexibility that may be introduced is such that you allow some of that information without necessarily compromising the security to be, for that information to be accessed on other people's hands or other gadgets. So that's one of the challenges you're going to have. Now, when you rely more on your IT equipment and ICT, then you turn more to things like, I don't know about you people, but I have worked the phone so much lately. I need to buy a power bank. I'm one of those who didn't have a power bank. So we are going to have to invest in more in such things. That means your communication bills. I don't know whether you've looked at them. If you're working the way I do, because all my meetings are online, all my meetings I've received more phone calls where I would ordinarily have walked over to people and talked to them. So if your practice was and risk assessment was that you manage communication by limiting your airtime, you're going to have to look to revisit that. Now, what then does this mean? Now, if the internet is going to be the new highway, and I'm talking about the road. If your road was as our office is on Ginger Road, or the way ICPAU is in Bukoto, really your next on Bukoto Street, your highway being Bukoto Street or Kampala Road, your next address really is going to be at the internet. So anyone who comes to your website must be able not just to see you, but also place inquiries. The way someone would come and ask at your office, at your receptionist. So what mechanisms then do we have on our website? So any kind of a presence we have on the net, maybe Facebook or social media, how can people leave inquiries there, and how do we have the feedback going back to these to the people that are trying to contact us? All these things that we have to talk about, whether it is SMS, whether it is telephones, whether web chats, online phones, and all those have to be seen together. I'm one of those that I was never sold to this mobile money. But clearly now we see these issues of electronic payments, whether it is by mobile money or by web-based payments, online payments through your banks. All these are going to come up. But all these things present a risk because of hackers, because of, largely hackers, that's the issue. So as you ride through and as we're seeing all these trends of people and more of this business coming online and more of this interaction is online, there is actually a real challenge that there is a risk of hacking, of pips, they call them pips, and so on and so forth. Zoom, for example, was doing so well until somebody said it's actually not well compromised. So as you do that, we're beginning to also check on our investment in ICT. We are going to have to think about how to trade on the content, and I talked about this, the issues of your website and the content, but and the answers, but I'm also talking more about the content and how you trade. So the issues of adverts, and you see now for us lawyers who don't advertise or accountants that don't, is this time to do it? Is this time to do it? Because these are unprecedented times. But we're seeing a lot of more, the world is seeing a lot more marketing of this, of produce on the market. And I mean, it was happening. We saw it. We just didn't kind of see it. They think about Uber. They think about Jumia. Now you look at people delivering foods to your place, the groceries. These applications were there. But all over the world, there is an increment in all these things, milk being ordered online and so on and so forth. So to answer the question, where is this going? What are the trends? Let's just face it, our lives are now online. The question should be, are we secure online? It's not just being present, but as we be secure. The way you walk around on Kampala Road, fearful of a pickpocket or a MAGA, is the way you're going to have to think about your internet highway and your presence on the net. Thank you, Olivia.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Kabito. And indeed, what you've advised is clearly in line with what the World Bank advised in its guidelines on managing risk and facilitating trade. And one of the key issues was that entities must ensure to be ready for ICT support, to encourage working from home, to invest in that kind of ICT that will enable remote working. And right now, I would like to ask Steve, considering what Kabi has talked about and the trends and the fact that now the internet and ICT seems to be the highway for business, how would you advise in light of budgeting and planning? What should a CFO do in these circumstances to deal with budgeting and planning? Thank you, Steve.
Yes, thank you very much, Olivia. Well, talking to fellow accountants, for the participants who don't know, all of us are not lawyers in this legal firm. We are a team of accountants and lawyers, and what we do is tax and legal. So So probably my colleagues, the participants wondering, what is the accountant doing there with the lawyers? Okay, yeah, that could be an answer. But to get your question, Olivia, for me, I think as CFOs, we want to do like the simplest things. Going forward, the simplest things. We've got to go back to the basics, and we've got to probably understand the fundamentals. Okay, is someone present? Are you? Okay, yeah. So I've got to understand the fundamentals. The problem we are facing currently is one of cash. I don't know of any business that has not been strained in this period. So the problem we are facing is cash. So what we've got to do from now on is to build cash, okay? Or to preserve cash, to make sure that we pay as less, I don't know whether that sounds good, you pay as less as possible and you pay later, but then you try as much as possible, collect everything you can collect and also collect it earlier. So that's what is happening. Currently, the economy is not doing well. I don't know of any economy that is doing well because activities are not, no activity is happening. Is low. Consumption is very, very low because there's no money that is going to the people. So there's a very, very big problem. So I don't want to prescribe. I don't want to prescribe or talk to you about things that you already know, especially accountants. But I want to give it. Being a tax practitioner, I would like to discuss things from a tax point of view, a tax planning point of view, okay, especially during COVID and just after. So the globe, what has happened in the globe, I mean, elsewhere, is that governments have managed to there are some governments that have waived, for example, interest on tax. There are those governments that have extended longer payment period, very, very long period. There are some governments that have actually got money from the coffers and have given businesses, okay? Or have given probably self-employees or people who with smaller businesses that are employing people that probably cannot, they think cannot survive this. But in Uganda, I have not seen that. We have, and I don't think we should expect it. I don't see that happening now. We cannot expect it. We can't expect it happening. So, but how are we going to deal with the taxman? How are we going to deal with the URA? Because there are things of managing cash flow. I'm sure the that are listening probably are experts in this, be advising us. But from a tax perspective, there are things that we have thought out, and we said maybe if this happen, they can as well help improve cash flow. So we are talking to the accountants who are not practicing taxation every day. So we have compiled this for you, okay? So the first thing that has happened that we need to think about, we need to embrace every small window that the day has given. It is not much, but it can help. We have, for businesses whose year ends, who must file by March, we've been given up to May, up to end May. So if you buy those 2 months, so you buy those 2 months, you're not going to miss any interest, so that is good cash flow. Okay? So every small window that they is given, we need to embrace it. So we can embrace that, okay? So there are people who have withholding tax, who pay withholding tax and never care to claim it. They just keep the credit there. So we have proposed that please, you need to ask for that refund. Ask for a refund, because you imagine someone has withheld tax from you, a lot of tax, but then you are also paying out tax. So and you're waiting for the claim of withholding tax probably at the end of the year. But currently we need every little bit of cash. So I would advise that we don't pay out any cash. So all you need to do, you can employ section 113 of the income tax, okay, and request the commissioner to apply any tax credit that you have to other tax liabilities, okay, to the tax liabilities you may have. You have a lot of withholding tax liability. You have provisional tax that you paid. You have tax credits in there, but then you also have VAT to pay. You also have pay as you earn to pay. So it's not. I've heard many people saying that it's not possible for you get a credit from another tax head. No, that's not true. There are provisions within the tax laws that allow you to relieve, that allow the commissioner to apply the tax credit you have on one tax head to the other, to a tax liability on another tax head. So for me, I think that's okay. Instead of you getting money to pay as right now we need cash, like every simple cash that we need. So the other we need to do, it is legal, it is allowed. At this moment, you even don't know where the business is going to go. So you are allowed to a nil provisional tax return, nil provision. Yeah, so when you file nil, you pay nil, but at least you know you're not giving away cash now to the taxman. So what will happen then? You may need to amend the return maybe in future, but it is allowed. So there's no need. You'll need to amend the return by year end. So in the meantime, you are buying a few months of that cash will buy you time, and it will relieve cash flow. Utilizing first year allowances, capital allowances, credit provision of credits, and aspects. So what we are saying that we've got to be vigilant and make sure that we claim all those allowances. People just pay and they don't care. So then there are those others who just pay tax because the taxman has assessed, and you want to get rid of them. You want to get rid of the taxman so you can concentrate on business. I don't think this time it's going to be it's going to be possible. It's not feasible. No, we don't have cash. So you don't have to pay tax that is not legitimate. You only pay legitimate tax. So please, there's a process of appeal. There's a process of objection. If you feel the tax is not legitimate, we should not be saying we have to pay URA because we need to get them off our back. No. So we need every coin now. Again, from a tax perspective, you can apply to the commissioner to be withholding tax exempt. Many people are enjoying this. Imagine every payment, every income that you receive, every little income that you're receiving currently is being subject to withholding tax. For example, businesses of practicing accountants and other consultants, or you're probably supplying to government and you're not withholding tax exempt. Every single money that hits your bank account already has suffered withholding tax. So you don't want to do that. Probably that withholding tax may not even be claimable in future, but in the meantime, you need to increase every cash that comes in. So we will request you to apply for withholding tax exemption. And the commissioner normally gives this withholding tax exemption. A few questions are asked. There's not you must be current, you must be a good taxpayer, you must be filing returns on time. So if you fulfill those, then the commissioner normally has no choice in giving you the withholding tax exemption. Okay, the other thing is businesses. There are so many businesses that are going through a hard time. And I think the URA commissioner expects this to happen. What am I talking about? People are going to employ, they want to get under Section 40 of the Tax Procedures Code Act and Section 67 of the VAT Act, where you ask the commissioner, what you're saying there, it's a remission of tax, that you're telling the commissioner that you must demonstrate that you don't have tax to pay the tax now. The business is not doing well. Probably paying that tax will render the business going into a situation of not being a going concern. Okay, if you can demonstrate undue difficulty of paying the tax, please, we need to apply to the commissioner to remit the tax. The commissioner will then recommend that case to the Minister of Finance. So do not worry that several people are applying, because I know many people are going to be applying for this. You also make the application. The law allows you to do that. The law allows the commissioner to do that. Yeah. Of course, because of the pressure that the commissioner is going to have, especially in this time, I don't think I don't think that everyone who will apply will get you. I know that it's going to be stringent, but then this does not prevent you from applying. There is something else that the commissioner has said. Extra voluntary disclosure. Section 66 and 66(1) of the Tax Procedures Code Act allows a taxpayer to declare any offense. There's a list of offenses, declare any offense, and you say, look, we know this is something that we've been doing. It is not something that it's probably illegal, or we did not know, but we have cleaned up, we are cleaning up our house. Please, you commissioner, that we are declaring, we know this is wrong. We know we shouldn't be doing this. So what the commissioner does then, when you apply under voluntary disclosure, the commissioner will allow you to pay only and only the principal tax. So the interest is waived, and any penal tax is also waived. So those are the things we need to. I know the commissioner is going to receive quite a bit of these. Yeah. Okay. Now we also need to people going into major contracts, major transactions. You need to seek a private ruling, because we have seen clients who do mergers and acquisition, who have peculiar contracts, and they don't know the tax treatment. They have not consulted a tax stand, or rather a tax practitioner, okay? And then they didn't know what they were doing. Probably 2-3 years down the road, there's huge liability. So at this moment, I think what we need to do is to seek private ruling. Let's seek a private ruling. So the commissioner tells you that, look, okay, whatever you're doing, this is the tax implication. Either go ahead and do it, or then you decide. Okay. From, again, a tax perspective, you have to make a decision. You do a cost-benefit analysis, and you ask yourself, look, we have tax that we are going to pay. Okay, if I pay this tax now, what is the opportunity cost, okay, of paying the tax now? What I'm trying to say is that you need to look at the business and make that decision. The accountant can make that decision and say, look, it is okay, let the URA wait, okay, I can afford to accumulate 2% interest per month, whether compounded on VAT or not compounded for the other tax, okay? Let me get that, let me pay that interest, but at least, let me pay that interest later, but at least let me pay my suppliers, let me pay my employees, okay? Because probably when the supplier withholds supplies, we will have a problem of continuity. So those are the two we need to be thinking about. You see, we have been we've been ranking the tax authorities as probably number one, but you need to rethink. If you have a supplier of a key commodity, let's just say you are in a telecom business, okay? You're in a telecom business and you have someone who is helping you maybe host your mobile money platform. If it does not host it, or if it does not supply that key component, because you have paid the taxman, well, it will threaten probably business continuity. So at this moment, we need to think in those regards, okay? We just need to think like that. So basically, you need to determine, should we get interest or should we pay? So that's one of it. So the other, VAT returns, for those who are making VAT returns, people who are in businesses that are VAT registered and doing supplying, making VAT supplies, there are moments when you have to write off bad debts. And all the times you've written off, I am sure several businesses where we have done a tax audit, where they've several businesses in which we've done a tax audit. Have had a bad debt, they have not gone ahead to claim the credit in relation to that bad debt, because I think it's carelessness or someone doesn't really remember. But I would advise that we need to keep track of any bad debts, and we need to claim bad debts. Okay, we need to claim we need to make a claim in the bad debts. Okay. Olivia, I think I should have answered your question. I have not discussed I've not discussed the everyday things that the accountants are experts on. As a matter of fact, we'll probably ask them to come and advise us. Things to do with cash flow management, because they are experts in this thing. But I just brought out only from a tax perspective. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Stephen. Thank you for sharing tax perspectives for all of us, business managers and business owners, and what we should look out for. And I want to just relate your conversation with the conversation that Kabito just shared earlier, particularly regarding employees and their welfare. And I realize that right now, as you look at most of the directives, be it from government, be it from the Ministry of Health, be it even from the World Health Organization, be it from the World Bank, the issue is about how to ensure safety of staff while they're working, whether be it at home or be it at the workplace. So clearly it means that then the heads of finance, whereas human resource may not be necessarily within your direct docket, there's planning around. We are being asked to ensure that there's hand sanitizers in places, there's adequate water, there's soap, there are gloves, we have thermometers, and all those have a cost implication, meaning that then heads of finance have to now look into welfare of staff in terms of safety, and then provision within the budgets, ensure that the required money or the cash that is required to acquire some of those health protective gears are obtained on time, to avoid the law catching them under the Occupational Safety and Health Act. Now I want to go to Rita. Rita, are you there? Rita?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, thank you, Rita. Now I wanted to speak to you. I know that you and Kabito have been involved in taking over distressed businesses. Obviously, with the COVID-19, we may not necessarily support distress per se, but one of the futures of a distressed business is financial constraints. So I want you to share with us, when you get into that business, I know that there are certain strategies you set which might mirror some strategies that might be applicable now in this COVID-19 crisis. Could you share with us some of the key strategies that you put in place to ensure that the company you've taken over continues operating? Over to you, Rita.
Thank you, Olivia. Good afternoon, everyone. When we're dealing with the distressed company and we are called in to take it on, most of the time the strategies we employ vary from company to company. But generally what we do employ, number one is we have to do what we call a diagnostic study of the company. That is really to help us to study this business and understand its history, both financially, operational, the stakeholders, and any other aspects that affect how that business operates. That study helps us then to strategize for the different resolutions that we may want to employ to be able to set company. When we complete a diagnostic study, then we go into what we call an assessment of the possible solutions for the different scenarios that we might have found. Part of what we do in a diagnostic review is what we call is a risk matrix, really. Understand the various risks that this company is faced with. In most cases, from the diagnostic review, we get a lot of information that helps us to understand what put that company in that place. And many times, it's necessarily financial problems. Sometimes it's governance issues. Sometimes it's external factors. So once we have that risk matrix established, then we go into the formulation of a solution. in insolvency, fortunately, there are various options that are available for companies that are having financial difficulties, that then we could apply one of those solutions as they are applicable, or we customize something on a case-by-case basis. Just for purposes of giving you examples, for example, we could, if we're called in by a creditor and maybe the other creditors who have an interest in that company, the company has an option to enter what they call a scheme of arrangement with the other creditor, with the creditors, and put a deal on the table to manage the different interests of the creditors. Or the company could go into what they call now in Uganda, like where it continues to remain, to operate its business normally, but under the supervision of an administrator who then implements what they call an administration deed, that creditors sign and agree is the way forward, that we're going to deal with this company. So the strategies that we do employ really vary from company to company. We right out of the risk matrix that we'll have established from the diagnostic study of that. The other issue that strategy that we usually employ, which is very critical, and it comes out of something you've just mentioned, is the question of stakeholder management. You do realize that the company goes into financial distress. There's so many relationships or interests or stakeholders affected. So one key approach we follow is to, of course, profile the stakeholders and then have an engagement with each and every one of them, depending on the nature of the interest. If I may draw back to COVID now, every company at this point should be doing what a stakeholder analysis. The people that have an interest in your business, the creditors, the suppliers, the employees, how are they going to be affected by the situation you're in, and how will it affect going forward? So then we have discussions with those people. If they're suppliers, we have discussions about how they are going to continue supplying going forward without them cutting off supply. If they, of course, suppliers include suppliers of labor. So then the employees are also managed in their special category as suppliers of labor. Because in some instances you may have to cut off, rather to reduce on staff if you can't afford it. So then how do you manage that situation? How do you manage giving people more work in light of a small financial pocket? And then if you have creditors, how do you deal with the other creditors who may not have been involved in this process? We engage each and every one of those stakeholders so that we don't have this process antagonized, and we keep the company afloat. At the end of the day, the goal is to have this company continue to operate in the midst of its financial troubles, but to get it out of that situation. Thank you, Olivia.
All right, thank you, Rita. What I hear from you when you talked about a diagnostic review of the business, really, if we are to look into finance managers, now for them, what they would be doing would be the business impact analysis, meaning they too must now look into the holistic business, not just their function, but look into the entire business and how different elements of the business are affected by this shock of the COVID-19. And when one of the stakeholders, Rita, you've mentioned the employees, and we must say that so far we have seen that employees have been a very important stakeholder during this COVID-19 shock. We have looked at the government directives, for example, where government is saying, you know, as much as possible, avoid terminations. If you can, let termination be the last case scenario, meaning that now welfare of employees and the sustenance of labor is one of the key elements that businesses should be looking into as you consider business continuity. So one of the guidance we'd like to share is that as finance heads, as accountants, as CFOs, your budgets now must be now looking at the critical expenses. and realigning the budget to address some of these immediate needs. For example, the drive towards employment welfare. If there had been a budget for, let's say, corporate social responsibility, for travel, and maybe some funds had been allocated to that, it's now time to consider whether that some of those monies can be reallocated then to deal with the welfare of staff. And obviously, when we're talking about what remedies are available, one of the questions I've seen on the forum was, you know, there's going to be terminations or layoffs because of slowdown in businesses. What options are available for employers and for accountants now who will be managing budgets and how to deal with it? And one of the recommendations we'd like to make is that we must analyze the business and see how we're doing in terms of finance. For example, if the business is completely down and you're not able to afford to pay at all, then it means you want to enter into a dialogue with your staff. I think one of the things that Rita talked about was that in solvency, they also talk about dialogue, and even in financial crisis. So now it's a time to dialogue with staff and look at possibilities. Is it possible for staff, for example, to take their annual leave during this time so that you don't pay and have to suffer an additional payment for annual leave later in the year? The other question is it possible for you to agree with staff to take and paid leave, especially for the longer periods of the lockdown where staff might not be working? The other option would be, would you consider remote working for some of the employees who can work from home? So instead of laying off those employees, could you provide them with the necessary ICT equipment to enable them to do the work at home, and then they continue earning their wage? And the other option would be, okay, if we can't do that, is it possible then to have a temporary layoff of staff? Now, temporary layoff, it doesn't mean that you have terminated contracts, but it must be justified. You must be able to prove that the company is completely financially down and can't afford to pay wages. And therefore, because of that, then the obligations can in the interim be suspended. And if you look at our employment laws, for example, Section 40 of the Employment Act, it provides for a situation where an employer is not obligated to provide work to an employee where there have been issues like frustration, acts of God, suspension of performance. For example, now the lockdown where people cannot move to their offices, and if their work must be done from office, the lockdown itself has suspended performance of work for non-essential services. So it would mean that at that point in time, employers may want to explore temporary suspension of work in terms of there's no work expected from the employee, and also there's no salary being expected by the employee from the employer because clearly there's been no work. However, that person remains an employee of that entity, and in the event that then this situation that has caused the suspension is over, then they're entitled to resume work. And when you look at Section 84, I think subsection 6 of the Employment Act, it provides that where there have been temporary layoffs of staff, it doesn't affect continuity of employment. So even in this short interim where you must suspend obligations both for the employee and the employer, it means that the person remains your employee and is deemed to be employed with you continuously. And in case at a future date, then the relationship has to be terminated, whatever terminal benefits would be available to them in terms of how long they've worked with you would be computed without excluding the period of the suspension. So our encouragement is that everybody globally, even the International Labour Organization, is encouraging employers to have, first of all, social dialogue with staff and explore options that may not necessarily lead to termination. So some of those options we're recommending, for example, if you can, where the company can afford, then you could adjust the budget. For instance, the International Labour Organization has employed companies to actually extend paid leave, meaning that much as somebody's annual leave has expired, if the company is financially able to do so, then they can still pay them while they consider them to be on leave. So those are some of the recommendations for now that we can make in terms of maintaining the employment relationship to avoid complete termination. And yet when the lockdown is over, you still need the staff. But for companies which have completely shut down in terms of business and probably they don't anticipate to to arise again even after unlocking, then it means one of the considerations would have to be collective termination under Section 81 of the Employment Act. However, the challenge with that is that you're terminating a big number of staff, meaning that you're going to have to incur expenses of paying terminal benefits in terms of payment in lieu of notice, payment in lieu of leave, severance packages, gratuity for those who have gratuity payments, repatriation for those employees that have been moved from places that are far. So you might find that the budget for collective termination might be more even expensive than if you are to agree to probably pay cuts with staff or to agree to temporary layoff, because when there's a temporary layoff, you don't need to actually pay terminal benefits. It's just in the interim. So those are some of the employment considerations that you would want to put into your budget planning processes to ensure that as you're doing your cash flow management, you have those interests being catered for. Now, I want to speak to Joseph Aja. Joseph Aja is our guest speaker today. Joseph, are you online? Joseph? I think Joseph may not be here. Let me go back to Joseph. Yes, please. Yes, Kamito.
Yeah. Now, I really want to just come in quickly and just talk to what you have spoken about, the issue of the how to handle employees, what Stephen has talked about with regarding to management of cash, especially regarding to taxes, and a little bit of what also Rita talked about. From a global perspective, I mean, businesses are shutting down. That's a given. There's no doubt about it. But what we're seeing in other jurisdictions is responses in different form. The responses that we're seeing with regard to government and legislative intervention. Now, in Uganda and some countries, maybe in Uganda, Kenya, I think that's what I know, Ethiopia, what you're seeing is interventions through the central bank to try and alleviate the impact of the economic impact on businesses. But I submit to you that it's kind of inadequate, because the challenge we have is much bigger. And you've mentioned some of these things. What you need is what government really needs to do is to look at this issue a little holistically. The government responses, in my view, can be summarized into about four areas, 4 or 5 areas that need to be addressed. Other governments, what governments are doing is designing something like a fiscal stimulus measure. Now, fiscal may not be seen in the sense of giving money itself, but although we've seen countries do that, Australia has done that, we've seen London, UK do the same, but those are far richer countries. I mean, Australia has unleashed a package of about $350 billion US, 16% of the GDP there. So we don't have that kind of resources here. But is the way to think about, at least for our government, to think about bailout packages or to guarantee facilities. Australia, which is very interesting, has passed something called the Guarantees of Lending to SME Coronavirus Response Packages, 2020. This is a specific package designed for SMEs that are tax compliant. So there's a criteria that is used in arriving at this. So what do? They are ready to, the government is providing this scheme to guarantee new money to SMEs that are affected by the coronavirus, and paying up to 50% of ready to guarantee up to 50% of the facility. These kinds of interventions are what we're seeing there. So short-term lendings to SMEs with a particular objective, stimulus packages, particularly aimed at protecting employees. Again, looking at Australia, they passed something called the Boosting Cash Flow for Employees Coronavirus Response Package of 2020. And this is particularly to support payment of employers designed to retain employers through the distress period. So, and we're seeing, and the countries are doing many of these major sectors that have support, receive government support and so on. So we clearly can't get a stimulus package in Uganda. in Uganda in the manner that we want. But at the very least, can we see if we can have a bailout, or maybe we don't even have a bailout policy, but some kind of guarantee scheme? We don't know. But there are other things that can be done without money, and other countries are doing. We've talked about countries that are passing laws to do this, and the legislative framework can be used to intervene in how these things are done. Look at how we have to pay terminal benefits or leave benefits and all these. The issue is about how to continue with these people in employment. Can we pass a law that allows that? Employees that would be made redundant, they'll be made redundant because there's no money. You can't protect the cash flow of that entity. So what then you do? Pass a law that either allows an employer to have or reduce that payment in some sort of fair manner, so that the company can retain rather than have to dismiss employees. What to do about it, statutory payments like NSSF and so on. Can those be either cut in half for this period? And how to deal with lenders. Now, again, looking at Australia, they have passed something called the Coronavirus Economic Response Package Omnibus Act that allows a law that has allowed to attach all the other legislations that would undoubtedly impede the development, the continuation of business. And so you have, for example, we all know about the section in the Company Act on insolvency trading. So yet we know that coronavirus creates a risk of insolvency trading, and it would therefore demand that directors of companies close the businesses for being fall of the act. But the Coronavirus Economic Packages Act, Omnibus Act, provides that such obligations are suspended. We've seen other countries that have passed the same, with other countries including Nigeria, which passed something called the name just goes away from me, the Emergency Economic Stimulus Act that was passed. We've seen the same with South Africa do that. So we haven't done that in Uganda, and this is something that I thought that could be done very easily. Introduce legislative reform that deals with these key stakeholders, employees, companies in distress. For example, someone is okay, I mean, they are going to be insolvencies, all right? But how do we quickly arrange for them to either be disposed of or be managed? How quickly can a company apply to court and get a protection order or meet its client? What flexibility? How many insolvency practitioners do we know can do this kind of work? Is it time to consider things like Chapter 11 as we know them in America? Under what kind of legislative framework? At least during this, for manage this COVID period, which we know is going to go on, anywhere between 18 to maybe, I don't know, 24 months. So it's for us to think about some of these things, and particularly have in place legislation that affect micro SMEs. Issues like payment of rent. Rent in Uganda is paid in dollars. In other countries, they have given moratorium rate of up to 6 months. Now, does it hurt the landlord? Of course it does. It affects him. But will he probably die? Maybe not. But he can trade in some sort of way. There are these things that can be done purely by law, and they're not. Now, what does that mean? The absence of this legislative framework, what does it mean for us? It means that now in Uganda, we are going to have to be extremely creative in ensuring the sustenance and the navigation of this business through these murky waters. Issues of just not how to manage, how to hold back cash, but how to relate. How do we relate with third parties that are really going to come down on us? Without a law that has readjusted the times, for example, on how to pay third-party claims, on how, for example, I deal with my mortgages. The law has, what government of Uganda has done is to approach this through the central bank, which has put in guidelines and said, we have allowed you and the bank to negotiate your repayment terms for up to a period of 12 months. But this does not affect money lenders. This does not affect people that I have borrowed money from. How do I deal with people that I have contracted with, to offer I don't know, clean my compound and things like this. The contractors that you have on your side, in view of the cash dry up that we have, how do we relate that? How do we handle that situation in the absence of a legislative framework, a law that allows you to reset? The answer, in my view, is in how you relate with these individuals. Our people skills are going to come into play. Creativity, we're going to think very, very hard. And for us, I think, as financial managers in our right, and as financial managers, say myself, I run a business and I manage my finances with the help, of course, of the experts from your esteemed institute. But we are going to have to think very, very, very differently. And the approach to that may vary. It may vary. It may, I don't know, it may vary. It depends on your skill and your gift, your power of speech, your power of seduction with your tongue, seduction in terms of your people skills, how you relate, how do you feel. And empathy is going to be key, because how do you fire people in this situation? It's going to be heartless. I mean, it's almost survival. The very nature of us is asking us to survive. But like someone said, let's talk rescue. Rescue is to see business differently as a partnership. Your employees are partners in your business. They're key stakeholders. Your bosses are. So how do we walk this journey together? This is going to be a test of the business. Olivia.
Thank you, Kabito. That was very insightful, and I think it has answered some of the questions. I see some people had asked some questions regarding how to deal with loan obligations with banks, how to deal with lease payment obligations, and generally speaking to strategy in terms of the effects of COVID-19. And what I get from your conversation is that there has to be a dialogue. Already Bank of Uganda has made it flexible in terms of the restructuring rules, that people can now approach their banks and seek to restructure, of course, with proof that there is financial constraints. And obviously, even for the lease payment obligations, I mean, it's important that if you have a lease obligation, then you communicate to the lessor and indicate the reasons for the failure to pay in time, and probably seek for time and seek for a restructure of such obligations. Because now every business owner, every business player is seeking for a moratorium of sorts, of a conversation with their counterparty to ensure that then they can go through this financial issue. I would like to quickly speak to Joseph Ajay. I had wanted to talk to him. And one of the key elements we've talked about, again, are stakeholders like employees. And obviously right now, we all appreciate that there's a bit of anxiety in terms of people are worried about their job security. And why I'm asking Joseph Ajay is an HR specialist, and he's very good with teams, building energy, building morale. So I wanted Joseph to kind of share with it, he can give for finance teams to put into mind as well that these are some of the important, they may not have been important before, but because of the anxiety and stress levels now going on, it's important also feel humane, be able to feel with others. So Joseph, I ask you to kind of share, how would you advise finance managers to think towards team morale, team boosting, giving hope to the teams to avoid telling them there's no salary now, you may not get paid? What can finance managers, what role can they play in the team motivation? Joseph? Hello, Joseph, are you there? All right, if Joseph is not there, let me ask Steve. Steve? Joseph, are you there? Joseph, we can't hear you. Steve, let me ask you, one of the questions that has come through has been for us to advise on how, what strategy setting we can advise our colleagues on operational strategy. As a result of COVID-19, how is it affecting operational strategy, financial statements, such as impairment of non-current assets, and then how can they deal with those scenarios? Steve, is that question clear to you? Steve?
Yes, the clear. I would clear, but unfortunately, it's not really part of what we do. Whereas we're team players, we do taxation. That question is at IFRS. We are not really current with IFRS, so I would rather we that question should be probably directed to the ICPAU. We are not competent to answer that question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Steve. Kabito. Kabito, are you there? Kabito, hello?
I'm here.
Yes. I know that much as we are not finance practitioners, but at least you can share in terms of operational strategy, being a business leader and having participated in other business leadership forums. How do you think that COVID-19 is going to impact on operational strategies? And then how do you think those strategies can be tweaked to meet the effects of COVID-19?
Let's just face it. If you have been running your business based on some kind of annual plan, whatever period you have, annual 3 months, 2 years plan, and so on and so forth. The immediate act of this is you're going to have to visit that. Clearly, it's been disruptive. It's been disruptive, no doubt about it. And right now, if your mode has been one of growth, unless you are in the IT business, and so on, of that nature, your ordinary business is now in survival mode. So your operations now are going to be affected because of lack of cash. Because of lockdown, you have challenges of access to markets. Because of lockdown, you're dealing with issues of productivity of staff. So you have shrunk, and your future, the horizon is now very low. So what does that mean? The operational issues are going to be really substantial. And I think Steve mentioned it very well. How do you postpone all payments that you can legally without attracting any liability? You pay only what is necessary. How do you hold off pressure? And your focus is now how to increase on your cash. How do you increase on your revenues? How do you have to rethink. You have to rethink. If you are in a business, some businesses are not going to survive. For example, if you have public transportation, if you are in the public transportation business, it's very likely that you are going to have. Our very nature as Africa, as an ACV market, we don't have cash reserves. Companies that have cash reserves could fall back to those. Even if we decided, and if your reserves are in sort of assets, we could talk about bonds or shares or even land. My take is that even the value of that is going to go down because everyone is going to hold cash. So you are in survival mode. The most important thing you have to do now is hold back on cash, manage your expenditure. Very, very important. You're going to have to revisit and let go of what is unnecessary. If you have been having paid holidays for staff, something to visit. You do not have. You don't have to go to that anymore. If you have been meeting and luxurious, been driving around because you could afford, now it's time to start walking about. You've been having 7 meals a day, time, and I mean literally that as an office, you're going to have to cut costs. You may have to ration sugar. You may have to ration and so on. If you have a big office space, you may have to reduce it because if you're in a business like I was talking about, you're in a business that is very affected, you're in the transport business, start looking for alternatives of survival. Start looking for alternatives. And that's not too hard. We've seen companies that have gone back to the drawing board. One point to do right now is go back to the drawing board and see how to come out of it. Olivia.
Thank you, Kabito. And I believe that has been very insightful. They can manage their operational strategies. And indeed, one of the recommendations of the World Bank is that for finance managers should be now kicking into action the emergency operational arrangements for finance, meaning that you're going to come up with certain emergency finance policies, your ordinary finance policies on how you make payments, disbursements, release, and cash flow management are going to have to change. So it means that you want to come up with certain emergency procedures that would allow certain finance operations to proceed. Kamito talked about probably now he has not been thinking about mobile money, but maybe this is a time when such online payments are going to be considered. So for an institution that has had a policy, an operational policy in regard to finance, where it's only check withdrawals and maybe somebody going into the bank to draw money, for now it's time to onboard onto online banking, to use mobile money, and it means that then your finance policy has to be amended to make those emergency responses at a time like this.
Just to add on to things like I talked about.
Thank you very much. I think there will be more questions, Kabito. And I asked the panelists, there are very many, beg your pardon? There are many questions in the Q&A. I'm asking that each of you can answer as we proceed. Allow me to now go to Joseph. Yes, Kabi?
Yes, I was talking about issues of the issue of employment productivity. See, if you have been used to having staff that clock in, right now, because of lack of supervision, your failure to effectively supervise, you are then going to have to change that to rather than just presence, you're going to have to deal that with either assignment based or productivity based. That I expect if you, instead of saying, this guy comes into office and spends the day all day around here, at the very least, your measure is going to be how many letters has he written, or how many, what is his output. We're going to have to look at the output in a very, very different and effective style to deal with of remote working.
Thank you, Kabito. Joseph Ajay, if you're there, as we speak about activity and remote working and generally energizing teams, I would like Joseph, kindly share with us how can, in this lockdown, how can staff be energized and how can they be enabled to work productively from home, and also to have that team spirit with the rest of the team wherever they are? What can be done by employers and of course assisted by the finance managers who are the controllers of the wallet? How can that be enabled? Joseph?
The challenge is obviously with regard to keeping staff engaged. It's extremely difficult to keep engaged staff at a time like this when we're being beaten left, right, and center by a global pandemic. We thought initially it was a health challenge, but it's actually turning out to be more of an economic challenge than a health one. And it's also affecting the impact is not just physical, it's also psychological. People are worried. People are concerned about their jobs. They are concerned about their health. They are concerned about their families, their children. They are concerned about school. Schools will open at some point when the lockdown is lifted. Schools will have to open, and parents are thinking about school fees. Very many organizations have suddenly discovered that they are not considered as essential services. So imagine what goes in the minds of employees who are told that their business or their entire industry is not considered essential services. So they are worried. What about those who are considered essential services? Medical. An employee has the right to refuse sufficiently protected with PPE and all these other devices and equipment that allows them to stay safe, even though they're in the front lines. You have workers like electricity workers, you have water workers, you have telecom workers who are out there in the front lines on a daily basis. Ambulance drivers who are repatriating the sick from one place to another to the hospital, who are transporting the drivers of the cars that are transporting the health workers to the field. So all of these concerns and issues are arising. But I think that from the HR point of view, whether it's finance, whether it's lawyers, whether it's accountants, on a daily basis is to have a daily check-in with your staff. It doesn't matter what time it happens. Initially, we're doing what is called business continuity planning, like we had from Kabito and Rita. Now we're in the actual BCM. We've moved from BCP to BCM. We have activated all our business continuity plans into business continuity management. You could do that whether through your WhatsApp group or through email or through phone calls or through video conferencing, at least on a daily basis, even if it's one word or one sentence or one paragraph, checking in to say, I am well, so is my family, my spouse, my children, my loved ones are fine. And then providing additional resources and support. For instance, transport. You know that in the lockdown, there is no means of transport. People are expected to stay home, but the emergencies that crop up from time to time, children fall sick at 3 in the morning, and so what do? You don't have transport. You don't have the phone number of KCCA where you can call for an ambulance. So the organization should at the very least try and have 1 or 2 or 3 cars cleared for the purpose of transporting staff in case of emergency. If you have a pregnant woman in the house, say your spouse, to ensure that you have access to such provisions. Then you can also send out alerts on a daily basis on email to inform staff about how to stay safe, how to keep themselves free from infection. Those sound like simplistic reminders, but on a daily basis, they become sort of the way of work. And then for those who are still have things like laser thermometers, those infrared thermometers that are used to check for temperature at the entrance of those buildings, those offices, and then social distancing. If you are sitting in cubicles in your offices, that may have to change. You may now have to measure 4 meters apart of square feet or whatever of real estate for people to acting health concerns and health benefits that are there. Then of course you have all this access to resources that you can send out to them employees via video, via chat, sort of to motivate them and keep them inspired. You can even do live sessions. I know of one organization right now, or a group of organizations through an HR forum that I belong to, that have organized daily yoga sessions every day from 3 to 4 p.m. yoga. So all you need to do is have your Zoom link, connect and join, and they have yoga sessions. In the school where my kids go, every morning they send a tip of about 5 to 10 minutes of PE. So they're able, even for young children, to involve them in all of these and help by, it takes away from the stress emotionally and mentally. And then lastly, but not least, I know this is something that very many people take for granted, but the sudden switch from working in an office or in a location to being location agnostic and working remotely has come along with some other health concerns as well. How many of us ask ourselves, the seat on which I'm sitting at home? Yes. I know lots of people when they come on video conferences, about space. Some are sitting in a couch or in a sofa that's not built for you to sit for 8 hours. So you're sitting in all these video conferences, you're sitting in all these conference calls and all these supporting the employees in the office using remote working tools. But how are you sitting? So the ergonomics of because COVID might go with your back. Eventually COVID will go, but your back is also gone. You need a back operation, a surgery, because you've been sitting very, very unprofessionally or in a way that hurts your back. So these are some of the concerns, just to keep reassuring the staff that their jobs are there if they're in essential services. If they're not in essential services, Olivia, you've already pointed out the fact that we may just need to negotiate a settlement for collective termination where push comes to shove. But these are all opportunities for us to engage our staff even more and be more empathetic, talking the language of numbers at a time like this in terms of sales. Over to you, Olivia.
Thank you, Joseph, for that insightful sharing. And I believe even the people of numbers, the finance practitioners, know that productivity comes from morale boosting. When you're happy, when you're well, then you're productive. Even in punching those numbers, you need to be well both in mind and in body. So it means that we need to care for ourselves, first of all, as the CFOs or managers or finance practitioners, but also have empathy towards our colleagues. And that means that if the HR manager then is asking for an adjustment in the budget to cater for some of these needs, because these are the needs that are going to ensure productivity of staff and ultimately bring in of the numbers that you want to look at the bottom line. So it means that finance now have to also put a very critical eye onto welfare of staff. How best can you ensure productivity of staff to ensure a better returns in terms of the bottom line? And now I want to skip back to maybe Rita and Kabito. If you can share, how would you strike a balance between profitability and survival? Obviously, some of the stakeholders in some of the institutions that we are engaged in, for example, where we are finance managers, CFOs, we have shareholders, and shareholders expect a return and they expect dividends. But we're also in this survival mode of COVID-19 and slowdown in business. How would you recommend for a balance? How would the balance be stricken between profitability and survival in this COVID-19? Kabito or Rita, you could share your perspectives. Thank you.
I'll ask Rita to do that.
Rita, are you there? Rita?
Hi, Olivia.
Yes, Rita.
This is a bit of a rather unique situation. It's not even a bit, it's a rather unique situation. And it's unfortunate that that balance is going to be very difficult. You can see that I think Bank of Uganda is starting to call upon banks to hold on to dividends, and you're seeing companies are going to take that route of cutting on paying out dividend to shareholders, because for various reasons they have to keep the liquidity going. But what can be done? I would look at it from a different perspective, that we don't, even in light of COVID-19, and I've seen a comment there by, I think, Claire, who was saying that businesses can still go on, Mr. Claire, that businesses can still go on. We could look at it from the fact that there's a silver lining anyway, even in these circumstances, that we can still survive in the midst of this crisis, that companies can still start, get through this and be profitable. There are things that can be done to avoid being in that situation. Number one, as you've mentioned, I think Vito mentioned it, that there are now areas of practice that are starting to thrive that we are not paying attention to before a month ago. Digital service providers, there are kinds of businesses that we can now start to invest in. We can diversify our businesses. When you manage your costs well, when you start to be critical about how you manage your costs, then you will be looking at profitability. It's easier for you to buy. It will be easier for you to balance your books. But also there is something that is critical when it comes to balancing profitability and surviving. Right, what we learned from COVID-19 is the need to have information and analyze it. While we are learning now that our businesses we cannot analyze only our businesses. We have to study the globe now. What is happening in UK, in Australia, in the US, in Asia, is to happen in a business here in Uganda in some form, some form or another. Businesses start to analyze this information of what is happening in the globe. What is World Health Organization doing? Where is World Bank diverting its interest, its focus? Where is UN focusing? Where are the donors in the developed world focusing? If we start analyzing that information and put it in our context, we will not need, we will be in position to actually thrive through this. We may not need to. And for me, I would look at it from that perspective, that if we start to be deliberate as businesses in how we manage our activities, if as accountants, maybe the focus is on the numbers. You look at a court case that may come about in your company, and you're probably looking at the cost you're paying the lawyer, but you're probably not thinking about the end result of that case, that how will that case, what will we pay out if we have to pay at the end of this court case? So those are things that maybe start to factor in right now. Do you have to fight over each and everything that every supplier issue, every creditor issue, or can you resolve some of these issues so that you don't have to incur any unnecessary costs? Then it will help us to avoid being in a situation where we have to strike that balance. Companies can actually be profitable. I don't know if Keke has a different view, but that's how people are looking at it now. The economists are looking at it now, that look at thriving through this as opposed to merely surviving, but how are you going to thrive in the midst of the crisis? Thank you, Olivia.
Yeah. Thank you, Rita. The approach outcome is a bit different, and it's a very interesting question you ask, Olivia. You're basically putting the question that in a time of scarcity, how do you deal with a child who is asking for a chocolate? That's a spoiled brat. And any business person who goes through this process, who has now tasted the COVID-19 challenge, continues to think that it's business as usual is not getting it. It's a spoiled brat. And the answer to such a position is really one of leadership. Because you see, the issue of companies existing solely for the benefit of shareholders through a profit is an old one. And I want to recommend a book. I don't know if you guys can see it. It's a nice book. Nice little book. I've loved it very much. It's called Purpose Incorporated. It debunks it's by a guy, two guys, John Wood and Amelia McGibbon. I recommend it. And for me, I read this book about 5 months ago, and the question you raised falls flatly into the definition of this book. It's asking you to look at the purpose of a company differently. Because you see, a company or a business is not in existence for shareholders alone. There are other key stakeholders that derive a livelihood out of that. Now, as a business owner, you need to see that. And once you see it that way, that business starts to thrive. You stop looking at your employees as mere tools of factors of production. They're human beings deriving a livelihood out of them. If you understand them differently, and you understand them as human beings with their own needs, and you relate with them at that level, productivity goes up. It's the very reason why slavery was abolished, because it just didn't meet the needs of capitalism. You have to pay the individual. You have to motivate him to work. And that's the way you'll have to deal with the supplier as well. Understand that that supplier has a business and has his own obligations. Once you do that, you create the right ecosystem that thrives, leads to the thriving of the business. If you're going to see it just for yourself, profits for the individual, you are going to stay small. Olivia. You're muted, Olivia. Olivia, unmute your mic.
Thank you. Yes, I've unmuted. Thank you, Kabito. I thank you for that insightful sharing about balancing the strikes and the interests of other stakeholders. And indeed, I believe that what you've said, that in the long run, if you cared for the other stakeholders, profitability will come. And we've seen that many times why you have probably corporate social responsibility budgets and all that, it's to respond to social needs, but ultimately it creates a bonding with society into maybe purchase and buying of your product. So right now, it's a time to buy into our employees, into our staff, into our communities, and ensuring a survival for all those around us, such that our businesses can survive and make profits subsequent. I would like to ask Steve. Steve, are you there? Steve? Okay, Steve may not be here right now. And I want to ask Rita about a situational analysis. Could you shed some light about how, for example, now as CFOs, can get into the mode of situational analysis and contingency planning, and what ideas you can share in regards to that in light of the uncertainties of COVID-19 and what circumstances they can put into play and have contingency plans in play to see how this goes.
Olivia, you're breaking. Kindly
Rita?
say that again.
I wanted you to speak about situational planning for in terms of business continuity. That now we have a scenario where, again, they're slow in business and you have to look at different options and probably come up with different contingency plans where one would be activated. If one doesn't work, another is activated. Could you throw some insights on that kind of planning?
I think when it comes to situational planning in light of what we are experiencing right now, it's really a risk matrix, and I think I mentioned it earlier. It's a risk matrix. How has this pandemic affected our business now? How has it affected our people now? How has it affected our stakeholders? You want to see how it has affected your creditors. If your creditors are not doing well, then they will come for you. How has it affected your suppliers? How has it affected your employees? And I think you've elaborated enough on that one. But again, how it affects your customers? Do you need to find a new customer base? So if you have that situational analysis right now, and then of course what I mentioned a bit earlier on the global circumstances as they are now, then it informs what you then put into your plan for dealing with the different circumstances as you analyze them. There are a few unique aspects about this particular situation that we are in, and that's what has been the trend, that while we've had crises where maybe you're having a demand, a break in the demand chain or a break in the supply chain, we have now a break in all chains. We are having a crash in the transport system, we're having a crash in the manufacturing, we're having a crash in the finance sector, we are having a crash almost everywhere. And I think only in technology and a few other sectors do you have companies thriving, so businesses thriving. So if companies are looking into situational analysis, right, it's going to have to be much broader, beyond the company itself, beyond Uganda, but going into the globe and then even projections by different entities as they are. If you look at what is happening right now, for example, to Virgin Australia, I don't know if you've heard about that scenario, that Australian airline that has gone into administration. If you look at the South African lines, those look like very big companies with within rich economies, but the fact that they analyzed the situation that they were in at that time, and if you've been following the trend on Virgin Australia, they've come through a series of discussions on how to arrive at putting all their being in a place where they can admit that this is the problem that we are having because of the global issue, and then this is how we are going to deal with it. As of today, we are having a discussion with bondholders to be able to to address part of that sector or segment of their interest, people who are interested in their business. It's really going to be broader as companies are dealing with it. It has to be broader, and it has to involve a review of even other stakeholders for us to be able to have a proper situational analysis. I've tried to look into what is happening now in Uganda, and every professional is trying to come up with their own analysis, probably from a legal perspective, from a financial perspective, from a health, the human rights perspective. But we as companies have to sit down and look at our own company within that grand scheme. How is it going to feature? Thank you, Olivia.
Okay, thank you, Rita, for that. I believe now we are coming towards the close of this conversation. I will ask again, like I said earlier, to the panelists, please, there are some questions in the Q&A. Some I believe have been answered in the course of the discussions. Some are still pending. But as we go towards the close, I'm going to speak to each one of us to look at the long-term projection, long-term plans that we can share with the finance experts on how to plan going forward, because obviously COVID-19 has come and the effects of COVID-19 are going to be seen even much some years to come because of the economic effects it might have had, the health impact, and even the death toll. So there's going to be effects for some years to come. So the question is, apart from the short-term planning, apart from looking at the current cash flows and all that, how can we look at a longer-term planning? For instance, 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, what should be put in place as a result of what COVID-19 has taught us? What should finance practitioners consider now in plans of when they are giving their finance projections and plans to management, to the boards? What then should they project to say in 5 years' time, we should have achieved this because COVID-19 found us are not ready. We don't want to be in the same situation when another pandemic or another disaster hits and then we are still struggling. So I want to ask each of the panelists to share. And I think I'll start sharing from an employment perspective. I think Kabito talked about how in other jurisdictions, governments have come in to help in terms of dealing with the economic consequences. Especially other jurisdictions, is that there have been some wage subsidies coming in from the social security funds in those jurisdictions. For example, you would find that the NSSF of other countries has come in to give wage subsidies to pay salaries for contributing employers, on behalf of contributing employers for the next 3 to 4 months. And that's something that we need to think about as a community of professionals. And obviously that's something we have to also push for in terms of policy reforms and law reforms. And I was glad to see that the Minister of Labour, I think in his speech on the 28th of April, indicated that they were requesting the Parliament to quicken the process of amending the NSSF Act to provide for Social Security now during this pandemic. But those are some of the things we have to think about, that Social Security should not just be for, a time when somebody has retired at 50 or something, but also for times like these pandemics, these sudden shocks in the labor market, which affects employers' ability to pay. Can then those contributions or benefits come in the interim? There have been other interventions in other jurisdictions, for example, being gotten from the unemployment insurance schemes, which probably would be similar to provident funds. But for those unemployment insurance schemes, they are there to actually secure unemployment consequences. So for example, in such a pandemic, some jobs, there are going to be some layoffs, there are going to be some salary cuts, there are going to be terminations. So what would happen with that unemployment insurance scheme is that it would cushion the employee in the interim when probably the employer can't afford to pay, or when they are terminated and they are still looking for another job. The insurance comes in and starts making payments. So what other jurisdictions have done, you'd have individuals themselves having unemployment insurance accounts, or you'd have a global insurance account in terms of where you have employer contributing employee and maybe even government coming in. And those are some of the things we want to think about recommending to UBRA, for example, so that UBRA can spearhead that kind of product into the provident fund, such that if people have a provident fund scheme right now, instead of waiting for when an employee is terminated to pay out benefits in lump sum, in such a scenario where there's a shock in the economy, where there's a shock to employers, the provident funds would come in and pay some salaries for probably another period of 6 months as the businesses get back on track, and then after that continue with their usual business. So those are some of the proposals that we might want to look into in the employment security benefits or the labor market security, to avoid this question of now we terminate. And as you realize that right now in Uganda, even while the Minister of Labour was encouraging employers that where you must terminate, make sure you follow the law, he also encourage employers to provide food even after terminating staff. So it means that at the end of the day, the welfare of staff is being taken care of even after termination, that there is that kind of corporate social responsibility now, which is going to be inward, that you're going to have companies looking into giving back to their own staff to ensure sustainability and survival during this time. So some of the recommendations we are making in terms of the future, 5 years, 10 years from now, we should have such schemes available. And of course, as finance managers, those are some of the things you want to look into how other countries are handling, how are those schemes formed. If you're talking about a contribution, if you're saying 10%, can your company manage, if the company was to pay 10% for NSSF and 10% for unemployment insurance, how can that be managed and how can it be planned for? So in case of any other disaster, we're able to manage our staff and not struggle with issues of terminations and layoffs. And now I'll ask Kabito to also share his perspectives on what he thinks the future should be like for our planning purposes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Olivia. I have about 3 or 4 issues to raise. Like I said, we have literally hit a reset button. And so I see the next couple of years really as a time to rebuild the new normal, as other people are going to talk about it. It's time to rebuild. And all the business rescue, all the business continuity protocols, I think everywhere around the world have been activated and have been stress tested, and their faults have been identified. I think that this is experience. If we don't slacken, if we don't think that this will never happen again, but the fact is that it happened 100 years ago. And even as we don't talk too far, we're saying that we may have another wave of this, which could be anywhere between 6 to 12 months. So we're going to have to also be careful. But what does that mean? I think when this is done, we're going to understand the power of savings, the power of building reserves for the entity. So I think that is one thing that we're going to have to take home about this. If you've not saved, this is going to be a lesson for you. If you saved, you're going to be vindicated. So everywhere around, I think in future, we're going to see more and more savings. The flamboyant lifestyles that we're going to see, we're used to. I think we're not going to see that anymore. Ugandans like to eat cash, but that cash has dried up, not just in Uganda, but everywhere. You know, think about it, all the donor money is going to dry out. All the, NGOs are going to run out of money. It's everyone now looking inward, everyone looking inward. What do I see? This COVID experience gives us an opportunity as practitioners, as insolvency practitioners and accountants are part and parcel of this process, of this profession. I think it's an opportunity for us. Everyone is going to need some sort of advice. This is the time for practitioners to flourish. Now, I do not see receiverships. I don't those because of the interventions of the central bank, and I think no bank wants to be seen as insensitive. We're not going to see any of those, but we're going to see, I think, tests in administrations and insolvency, business rescue, and because where we've tried some of the things, even within the confines of the law, as some of you might know, some of the cases that have been personally involved in, is that we are condemned when it is even clear in the law. However, insolvency is a new practice. It's a new and young profession. So, and it deals with questions. It deals with questions. It's not like accountancy. It's not like the law itself where, you have answers. The question of insolvency has always been, how do we help it? How do we get out of it? How can the legal framework work? So it calls for creativity. Now, this is the opportunity for practitioners to exercise creativity, and I think the courts are going to be more open, more appreciative of what you're trying to do. So, the practice always says, be bold, say it, put it out there. Let's see if it works. Well, good, we'll have something new. So this is an opportunity, and I'll challenge all the members of the institute out there in this profession to come out, be bold, and let's talk, let's share. It's a common problem. All these are common problems. You can work there and see how people, alleviate the situation. Because I see, I mean, as a lawyer, I'll have it speak as a lawyer. We're going to see an improved court system. I mean, already the courts are talking about hearings online. I first attended a hearing online, that's 4 or 5 years ago in a court in New York. And I found it absolutely amazing because I was interacting with witnesses seated in a New York court. I was interacting with witnesses in Australia and in London. And it was very interesting the way it worked out, the efficiency of the system. So this has been ongoing. I really don't see why we can't do it. And so here we are now being forced to do it. I don't see a turning back in that regard. Because of increased IT use by the courts, I'm seeing certain things like online filings. That means that I increase efficiency. I don't have to, these clerks that give us a little trouble sometimes, maybe those are details that shouldn't be given to you. But going back to what we are as court users, as users as well, being finance managers, we are probably going to see a drop in the cost of litigation because of that. So I see in 5 years more IT use in the court system on certain things. Like, we don't really need to go to court for certain things, and then you see, we go to court for an injunction when we should have filed and passed on these documents, filed online and had them court. Court doesn't have to call us to argue over these things, but they call us and then we bill you. So I see a decrease in that. So those are the three issues I see already.
Okay, thank you, Kabito, for that insight about the future. I don't know if Steve, are you still online? Steve? Oh, well, I don't know if Steve has gone off, but I know that there are some of the questions that are coming.
Have we lost Olivia?
I think she's having a network issue.
A network issue. Okay. Rita, you and Steven are off.
Steven has trouble with his internet at home.
Okay, so these are the challenges that we have. Rita, let me ask her. Who is that?
Olivia is trying to talk.
Oh, she is? Oh, she's back in?
No,
okay, Rita, there's some questions. Maybe I don't know, some questions that have come up that I see. Maybe you can help answer some of the things as Olivia logs in.
I noticed a question about WBS.
Oh,
oh, okay.
Okay, I'm back. Well, these are some of the challenges we're going to have to deal with going forward. And I think I saw that NITA has put some program for MDAs. I think NITA should plan a program for the entire country so that then we can have uninterrupted, internet connectivity. But I wanted to ask Steve, if he's still online, to share with us his perspectives in terms of regulation, in terms of tax. How can we advocate for some of these tax rebates? And one of the proposals I was making is that we must move together as a group, I think, be able to advocate, to show the government and the tax authority the implications of some of these taxes and what other countries are doing to cushion their citizens or their professionals from some of the effects, and then be able to put up a case for how then we can justify some of the amendments in the law, in the tax laws, to cater for some of these rebates that most people are looking for. Because we know that, I think I saw like Kenya recently passed an act where they've reduced the payee rates. So it means that they've reduced it for the rates for employment income for payments have been reduced. So it means that we can also advocate for something like that, and even reduction in some other tax rates, or even a complete waiver of some of them. But that takes a group together to work together and advocate for some of those. So I'll ask Steve to come through and share something if he's online. If Steve is not around,
Dropped off Olivia.
okay, let's talk to Rita. Rita, what are your perspectives in terms of long-term planning? Rita.
I think we are going to look at it from number one, how businesses are going to then position themselves for how they're going to position themselves in these hard times for everyone else, in terms of how easy is it going to be to do business with you, with your business? Are you cheap? Are you easier to reach? Are you more flexible? As in, businesses are it's going to be now a deliberate strategy for us to position ourselves to be in the reach of the people that we want to deal with. Secondly, you'd look at we have what the procurement, for example. You're going to find that a number of companies or suppliers of services and supplies are going to be, or rather, going to be in what you'd call insolvent or even not tax compliant. And we have legal rules that require someone who participates in a bid should be tax compliant and having financials speaking to a certain standard and having been insolvent and all other criteria. Businesses are going to have to position themselves while our laws transition slowly to that new normal that is happening right now. Businesses are going to have to think of ways to go around some of these hurdles in procurement. The other thing I think, like that Kabito mentioned on saving, on the other, to flip the coin is also to be less wasteful. Do we have to do that? Do we have to spend or do everything as we've been doing it? Or we are now adjusting to working within? Because if this happens, one of us, many of us at least, thought that there would be a time when we are all told to stay home. Like everyone is told to stay home apart from a few quote unquote essential services. So we are now learning to be less wasteful so that you could have something that you could keep to be able to save or have in times like these. The other, what I look at now is new businesses, of course. We are now going to learn to diversify more in our service offerings. A number of companies are diversifying. What I found interesting is something that I learned recently is that the government of Australia has started charging Facebook and Google for the content that they are putting online. As in, even the government is looking for ways to get money. So they have started saying, you people, Google and Facebook, you get data from you get content from our media and you post it for free. So you're going to be creating some royalties to the government of Australia so that they can fill in. So you're seeing that there's now an eye for new sources of revenue for businesses so that they can be able to survive and go on. And also, as we think forward in the that lockdown is that maybe you want a chain, part of your chain to remain operating as opposed to a total shutdown. What kinds of businesses are we envisaging that will remain operational even if there is a total lockdown? How we operate and operate fruitfully, even if we are told to shut down tomorrow, or if this shutdown is going to continue for another 18 months or so. I think that is more or less it. Maybe what I would like to conclude with was a question that a gentleman, I think it was Mr. Adrapa, asked about WBS. It's Kabito's question, but I'll put my part and Kabito can top it up. He asked, what are the challenges? Why do we enter some companies and like WBS and they fail, yet we are supposed to be doing a restructuring and business rescue? I will save my challenges and Kabito, he was the receiver there. Number one is sometimes and many times we are called in when it's too late. Not a little, but too late. There's no money, there's no business, there are no staff, there's literally a shell and we're asked to turn it around. There's no one who wants to deal with that business. and Kabito will elaborate more on that one. Number two is lack of, we have a challenge of cooperation. When you come in as a practitioner, like I said, there are very different, many stakeholders. We have challenges of cooperation, sometimes from the director, sometimes from the staff, sometimes from other creditors and other stakeholders. So then a turnaround is fruitful when you have full participation of all stakeholders, because one creditor can put you down, even if all the other creditors are willing to participate, or if the directors choose to withhold information about that is critical to a restructure. It is not easy for us to manufacture information or to force figures or deals on them. So if we don't have the key stakeholders in a business, then we have a lot of trouble trying to work out a turnaround. My third and last challenge is we have so many informal businesses. Businesses on the outside appear as if they are very formal, as if they have records, as if they keep proper records and books of and documentation and business. But on the inside, when you enter a business, you find you ask questions and you have to get information from people's heads. So if you have situations like those, you have to do a proper analysis of that business. It's hard to know its history and to independently verify how it has been performing or its challenges. So those are the challenges that we experience, and I'm not being specific on WBS. Kabito can choose to do that if he wants, but I've spoken from a general point of view. Thank you, Olivia.
Thank you, Rita. I think there's first of all, from a legal definition of what a receiver is and what his functions are, that is normally misunderstood with, and it's at odds with what you suggest. It's not that a receiver is meant to turn around a company. A receiver is appointed by a secured lender or a statutory lender in some cases to take over the entity, the data, I'll call it, and pay debt. So the principal duty of the receiver is to actually pay the debt, take over the assets, undertaking of the data to pay the security holder. So you can see then that the functions are at odd with what you are suggesting. So the idea is not business rescue. The idea is not to turn around. That's not it. It's to go in, and quickly get value for the person who has appointed, has enforced his charge. But the idea of business rescue, the purpose and the drive of rescue, is really our style. We use it as a style, and as a mode, as it is at odds with the purpose for which of the appointment. It also means that the effect of success is dependent on the attitude of our appointer. If they're a bit relaxed and they can wait for their money, that's no problem. Then we can work. If we can also help in building the relationship between the borrower and the data and get the value that we want, then that's okay, then that happens. Does it succeed? Yes, sometimes it has succeeded. Does it succeed all the time? Hell no, doesn't work. But the other factor that comes into play and is really one of the big factors in the success of a recovery in this manner is the absence of a secondary debt market. Had there been a secondary debt market that can come and take over this facility in some sort of way, that would have been excellent. But unfortunately, these opportunities are not there. But the rest, Rita has spoken of very, very well. We are normally called in late. We find the patient in the emergency room on a high dependency unit. There's so much that you can do. Had we been called in earlier, as sometimes we are, we help out. Olivia.
Thank you, Kabito. And before you get off, I think as you speak about receivership and all that, I think some of the issues or some of the consequences of COVID-19 might be that there will be situations where companies feel that they're insolvent, but they don't want to get into a position of being into receivership. And so I would like you to share, first of all, with us the insights on how you can restructure a business without going into receivership. The number two, you've talked about aspects of a secondary market. And as we're looking into the future, because now there's an economic meltdown globally and even in our country. So the thing is that you might have situations where businesses are struggling and there is need for that secondary market. So in terms of long-term planning, how can that secondary market be created? What are the available options or avenues? Thank you, Kabito.
Yeah, on your first question, there are tools of debt restructure that are available under the law that can be used to navigate tough waters like this one. Rita talked about them a little earlier. Number one was the administration, the others are schemes of arrangement. I see this happening more in the days to come because it's inevitable. The insolvency law is going to kick off. It's the only way of surviving now. You know, administration, pre-administration, pre-admin packs, and schemes of arrangements that are going to be very, very key in managing debt, leaving out the toxic asset, as we always say, so that the clean asset can go into, or the entity can go and work it. So the idea is very simple, that there are mechanisms under the law that allow an entity to apply to court for protection to be able to negotiate with its creditors. So that option is available. We don't have much time, so I would elaborate that a little more, but Rita talked about that a little earlier. Now, the issue of a secondary market, what has happened is that there have been attempts at building a secondary market through what is called the a consortium of banks. The Uganda Bankers Association came together and set up what is it called? Sorry, the name slips my head.
The Asset to Construction Company.
Yes, yeah, the ARC, Asset to Construction Company, ARC, yes, that's right. The ARC is supposed to be buying toxic assets off the banks' books, then provide an avenue for restructuring them or disposal of them depending on what is available. The process has been long and ongoing, and we were expecting some money from the World Bank and other investors. That process may well be hampered by now, but it's time for government to look and either guarantee this fund so that this option is available as a secondary market. I see this development as inevitable. So in the long term, it's the healthy thing to do anyway. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Kabito. And is Joseph just still online? Joseph, are you there?
Yes, I am, Olivia.
Yes, Joseph, we are looking at long-term planning, and as we've seen that human resource or human capital is one of the key essentials to ensure business continuity, even in the long run. So from your perspective, what recommendations would you make for long-term planning for even finance managers in terms of business continuity regarding staff? What should be in the planning process for 5 years, 10 years to come?
All right. The first would be for the staff themselves. You need to make yourself extremely agile. We've been talking about digital access to learning, digital access to work, remote working solutions, and deploying some of these for a couple of years now, maybe 10 years or so. But you got a lot of pushback, especially from some of the baby boomers and Gen Xers, because they were not necessarily quick at adapting to technology. So the first thing is for employees to be extremely tech savvy, regardless of the industry, whether it's finance. There are ways of being tech savvy within the financial industry. As an accountant, there are ways of being tech savvy as a lawyer. You've just talked, Kavi and yourself have just talked about court cases now being filed and heard online. This has become the new reality, the new norm. So it's no longer just a futuristic thing, it's something that we're living right now. It's a reality. So staff members must retool themselves with the law or the international financial standards, reporting standards, or the chartered standards of ACC or CPA or ICPAU. You must also be able to deliver the same service using digital platforms. So we can no longer shy away from the digital and tech savvy way of doing business. That's now has become, it's a rock solid thing. It's sealed within us now. Secondly, employers must optimize their data. They must optimize their labor. How do you optimize your labor? How do you optimize your manpower? If you have 50 employees, but you've been able to pull through the lockdown with 25 or 30, are you optimally utilizing all your human capital? Are you putting all your resources to proper use? Are you not being wasteful? Kavi just talked about being wasteful. The wasteful is not just in your kitchen. It's not just in your lifestyle. It's also in your employment costs, your overheads, your OPEX and CAPEX. You must try and minimize that to protect your bottom line to the extent fully possible, because the shareholders will expect a return next year. If they're keeping on investing dollars in your business or shillings, they expect a good return, a positive return the following year and the year after. Otherwise, they'll pull out, they'll liquidate their shareholding. So you must be able to rationalize the human capital that you have. Are you able to utilize it maximally? Are you able to have performance measurement? Are you able to have always on conversations that the staff are as productive as they were before the lockdown, as they are during the lockdown, and they will be after the lockdown? In terms of space, we're talking about finances here. We're talking to you accountants, and we're saying, if you've been hiring so many square feet of prime real estate in the middle of Kampala Road or Ginger Road for your office space, sitting 200 employees, do you actually need all the 200 to sit in the office? Can you not split some of them and half of them work from home and the other half work from office? Two things you'll have accomplished. One, your cost of rent will go down tremendously. We're all talking about preserving cash. A few minutes ago, when we still had Steve online, he talked about the need for us to rationalize the cash reserves that we have now. Protect every cash that you have and bring in more revenues if you can. And so minimize on your cost of doing business, minimize on your office space and rent, optimize on technology, obviously. I know a lot of offices where people are still very, very insistent on physical signed documents. Electronic documents are the way to go now. Electronically signed documents are acceptable. Online banking, e-banking, mobile banking, and so on and so forth. Those are some of the things you have to explore right now. Learning management solutions, LMSs, on-demand learning portals, online performance management systems, online core banking systems or core accounting systems, invoicing and receipting, and so on and so forth. All of these things are going to have already become the way of working going forward. And lastly, but not least, I still want to emphasize the fact that as businesses, you cannot be planning for 2 years now. It's suicidal, because everyone in 2020 or 2019 planned for 2020 been disrupted massively. So we need to plan for 5 years at the very least, or 10 years, or even more. Now, of course, realistically, things will change along the way as you go, but it's fine. As long as you have the key pillars in place, you've planned for your finances, your customers, your business processes, and your technological systems of deployment, and your people and learning and growth and development of your talent, then you will be able to weather the storm. You'll become what is called a resilient business or an agile business that can easily bounce back from these shocks. Some businesses will not bounce back. Rita just talked about Virgin Australia that has gone into receivership, I think 2 days ago, into administration. 90,000 pilots as of 2 days ago are out of employment, 90,000, and this will continue. So if you can salvage your business, find cost-effective means of salvaging your business, keep your best manpower. Please do not lose your manpower to competition, because whilst you're all crying COVID-19, there are people who are recruiting. Essential services, they're recruiting and they're inducting them online. They're giving them tools of trade, and they're able to run meetings all across the world. They're very location agnostic and very agile. So remember, do not lose your human capital. Your best resources and best capital is your human capital, your human assets. Ensure that they are motivated, that if you can retain them. And in the unfortunate event that you can advise us on. But otherwise, try to the extent fully possible to optimize your businesses.
Wow, thank you very much, Joseph, for that insight. And as you talk about, I think when you gave a conversation about IT and e-work, we have the legal framework in Uganda that can accommodate e-working. We have the Electronic Transactions Act, which deals with electronic transactions. You're talking about filing of documents online, e-banking, e-financial statements. We have the Electronic Signatures Act, which provides for how electronic signatures can be managed, meaning that you can actually have those electronic signatures. We have the Computer Misuse Act, which deals with how we should be able to work with these computer gadgets, and there are even offenses for misusing these technological gadgets. So it means that the legal framework is already in place, and even the courts, as Kabi has said, have actually also now seen the light, and now they've come up with the video conferencing rules. They've come up with the constitutional integration of ICT into judicial matters rules. So we have rules that are now enabling hearing of cases online. In fact, I think just yesterday, the Chief Justice commissioned other rules to deal with e-hearings during the COVID-19. So it means that all of us must be prepared for this e-working or e-partial working, whichever a company might ought to go for. And as the CFOs, then we must be planning for what is the investment, what is the financial investment into this kind of working, and what do we have to do to advise management or the board on how to deal with those costs that are necessary to ensure continuity in work. Now, before I lead to the close, I would like to invite representatives of ICPAU. I think we have John Bosco or Ambrose. There are some questions that were specifically meant for ICPAU members, and I would request that ICPAU, you can clarify on some of the questions that the members sent through. John Bosco.
Thank you, Olivia, and I would like to thank the panel for the brilliant presentation. The questions that address ICPAU, we shall compile them and send responses because we have run out of time. But on behalf of the Institute, I would like to thank Legal Mark and the team for a brilliant presentation, and also thank the participants who have participated in this afternoon's webinar. We thank you very much and would like to close this training. Thank you.
Thank you.